The world is constantly telling us to live our authentic self, but we can get confused about what that is and where to even find that.
We're all struggling to figure out, what's authentic? What is even real?
What is even real?
There are so many fakes that are out there, but now we're really in a position where we're really trying to fool each other.
But since everyone's doing it, it seems normal. So how do you know that's real because everyone else is doing it? That's one of the big things I think is huge in finding authentic purpose.
Well, in our last conversation, hello, hey, here we go. In our last conversation, we were trying to work through this idea of authentic purpose and what is authentic and how do I know if my life is authentic? Am I living the purposes that God has for me? And we got in a little bit to the life of David. We set it up right at the end with these 4 pillars, these 4 ideas, these 4 different pillars. Today, in this conversation, let's really focus on that first pillar, which is service. I think when you think about David's life, you see his life marked by service. Before anything else, I think it was service. What do you see? What do you see when you think of his young life in Scripture?
Well, the first things that he did that we are told is he was a shepherd. And as the shepherd, his brothers were off to war and he brought them food. His dad's like, oh, go give him food because he needs food. And so he brought him food, and then he served Saul as king. He was his armor bearer, and he played music for him. So he was constantly serving in his young life. I know as he got older, he did in other ways, but those are some ways that I know that he served when he was younger.
When you say service, like for David example, the virtue of it, like what do you mean by service? Do you think he was serving their brothers just to do it like he was getting something out of it, or?
No, he was a baby. Like he was what was he? Did we say he was the eighth
Yeah,
son?
he's the 8th
I always
son.
get confused because, the 7th son of Jesse. Anyway,
Yes.
so he would serve his brothers. He was the baby, so they were off doing the things that they're supposed to be doing as men, and he was going to take care of them because he's the last one, I guess. I don't know.
Yes, I mean, he was the 8th son. In the lineup of 7 sons, he wasn't there, right? When we understand when the prophet came. But his whole life was marked by service. And I think when we're looking at our own lives and our own purposes, David was always about service. We can look at Jesus, we can look at any other character in the Bible, and I think you will find that their lives are marked by service. And service has a posture to it. I think when you think of Jesus and the time that he was washing the disciples' feet, his all things had come from the Father. He had come from the Father. He was going back to the Father. And he wanted to get up and still show them the full extent of his love. That's John 13. Verse 4 says, so he got up, he took off the outer robe, and he put this apron on, and he began to wash the disciples' feet. Mm-hmm. Now, some of them weren't comfortable. We know Peter wasn't comfortable with that act of service. But service has a posture. You're leaning forward. And I don't know if they put their feet up on a chair for him or something. But when you think about service, it's a lean forward posture, and he's washing those disciples' feet, and he says, I gave you this as a command for you to go and do this. And if you do this, you will be blessed if you do it. When I look at David, you find him, whether it's just as you mentioned, from being a shepherd, serving the sheep, serving the family, or whether he's making grilled cheese sandwiches for his brothers, out at the battlefield, his life was marked by service. And so as you think about your own life, or we start to think about authentic purpose, where do you start to see service show up in your own lives?
Well, that's the question that I think I need to be asked, even just sitting here, is because what the world says about service today is the problem that I have, or that a lot of us have with service. I think the culture standard today is, I expect to be served, but I don't need to go out and serve, because that's the problem. How am I supposed to find my authentic purpose if I'm not serving nobody?
Or if I do get served, what do I get out of it?
Yeah.
If I'm going to serve you, what are you going to get me? So do I need to be tipped, or are you going to pay me, or you know what I mean?
So service, so as you're thinking about this and as culture defines it, then there's there's this expectation of service. But I think more importantly, when you think about culture, it sounds like, well, maybe we devalue service.
And what do you mean by like devalue?
Well, if I'm out trying to get mine, or if I feel like I'm trying to find the things that get me to comfort, things that are going to make my life better. Well, here's one way that's not going to make my life better is serving you. Now, you want to help me make my life better, you serving me, then all of a sudden my life's better. But if I'm trying to think about service from that perspective, the way the world might see it, well, it might feel like the furthest thing away from my authentic purpose. In fact, I might have fear that, wait, by helping you, I'm helping your dreams come true. I'm elevating you, but it's not doing anything for me. Sometimes I think we are afraid that service is going to take us further away from our purpose than closer to it.
When we talk about what the world says, I think it's really important to where we can switch gears and figure out, okay, this is what the world says, especially for me. I need to know what Scripture says. I need to know what my Bible says about it. And I think one of the biggest intents we need to have is, like you said, what am I going to get out of it if I'm serving for you? But if I serve for the Lord, that's a whole other story, because the treasures he's laying up for me in heaven, that's not just one, going to impact my eternity, but two, shift me into a position where I can find my authentic purpose. And Colossians 3:23-24, Paul says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as if you're working for the Lord, not human masters, since you know that you will receive inheritance from the Lord as your reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. So I think it's important when we think about the culture of what the world says of serving. I mean, regardless of what the culture of the world says, in true service is going to be the service that is provided not through our own will, but through the will of the Lord and what he's instilling us to do, because we're called to do that. You know, it's not just a thing where just go do it. No, we're commanded to go out and serve, man.
And I think there's good reason. I think there's good reason for the command for us to go and to serve, because of everything that Christ has done for us. When we look at how God, being rich in love, rich in mercy, gave his son, and his son came and served as a living sacrifice for us, then out of that love, out of that place, then yes, let's go and serve already because of what's been rendered. I think a lot of times the world sees service as, well, what are you going to do for me? But for us, from a Christian perspective, it's he's already done everything.
Yeah.
Like my service is just part of a gratitude that I have. Now, I do think it's interesting when we look through service and through the lens of service in all of our lives. And it really doesn't matter, even if you are living in a counterfeit purpose, trying to go and get yours, service is always going to be a part of everything that we do. It is a constant. It is the unspoken language of every transaction, every interaction. Our friendship has service. That's part of it. Even these conversations that we get into. And you can go and work at a Chick-fil-A and everything that you serve can be for, my pleasure.
Yeah.
But even if you think, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to make it rich. I'm going to be a lawyer. All right, well, who are you serving? I'm going to go be a doctor. Well, all right, you might make all this money, but then who are you serving? If we're ever thinking about what it is that we want to be one day, or whatever it is that we think we're going to do one day, if we're only seeing the outcome of that result, this is the thing, if I were to be this, I would make all this money, but we don't see the people we're serving, I think we might be looking at a counterfeit pursuit. Like, I think that's where we're finding the counterfeit part, because in our lives, or what we find ourselves called to, is this idea of service.
Right.
And it's going to be a posture that we have,
Right.
and it's going to be a constant part of our lives.
Well, and I think we can't get too caught up on what am I going to be either. David, he served where he was. So
Yes.
he was a shepherd, and he served as a shepherd. He was a person who could play music, and he did it for the king. He was the youngest son, and he served his brothers. So wherever you're at, you constantly need to remember to serve. And I think eventually God will direct you into the role that he has called for you in your authentic purpose as well. But to remember also, our service isn't as eye service, right? In Ephesians, it talks about, it says here, I have it right here. We don't serve in the way of eye service as people pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. So when we're serving, we don't just serve, to put it on TikTok or on social media so that people can see what we've done. It's like you were saying, it's to the Lord, and He will use that. He will use that for His kingdom.
When you talk about putting that on TikTok, that makes me think of we hear it now sometimes in our culture called virtue signaling.
Okay.
So whenever I do something and I record it, or we call it maybe a humble brag in some kinds of ways, but it's trying to say something else. It's a virtue signal, and it doesn't always speak.
Screams, and it doesn't speak the right language. It's
Yes.
a whole another type of, it's that goes back to what is real and literally what is fake, How do we decipher that?
Yeah, and to think about, there are those that are serving and yet faking.
Yeah, when we say like what is, you see it on social media, and I'm not just going straight to social media, but I think that's the most prevalent thing in our topic today is that. And you can see somebody and they might do what you said. What was it? Virtue
signaling.
Yeah,
Yes.
they might put out there that act of service, which is that's completely fine. But through my lens of now, I'm seeing that. Okay, I think it can be deciphered two ways. I think if I see that act, how am I going to know their intention behind why they posted it? That's the first thing. Like that's also hard to decipher. But we shouldn't we shouldn't have to boast to do that. I think with service, if we're going to try to, not even on our own power, try to be positioned into our authentic purpose, it's not going to go by, I'm going to, and now don't quote me wrong, I do my own thing with trying to like spread the gospel, but you don't just sit out here and you think because you see someone posting this act of service, now I got to do exactly what they're doing because that is the road that, like what you said, like don't focus so much on the destination. Yeah. You got to go do exactly what they're doing because everyone's act of service might be different. Like for where I'm from, I'm blessed because I got to see the hood. I got to see the other sides of it, and my act of service might not be the same as what that person's posting. Mm-hmm. So it's different for everybody, and I think that's a huge thing with what you said with virtue signaling. I want to know like what you mean by more of that, like the virtue signaling. Like what is?
Well, so sometimes, and this is when we talk about the deep fakes of life and the deep fakes of humanity, is I might signal I have a particular virtue, like that I care about those that are suffering from a hurricane. And so maybe I play a song or I write music or I do something that makes it look like I'm there with you in solidarity. But after the lights click off and I hit send on that, I'm out. Like I'm not doing that. I'm actually counter to the very virtue that I just showed everybody that I had.
And that's the difference that I think is huge because we look at David, the lights, even when they were off, this dude was waking up at 6:05. I don't know the exact time, but the cracks of dawn, getting up, doing the same thing because he wanted to serve his brothers, not looking out of getting something out of it, but because that's what he was called to do. And two, that was, I think, not necessarily the societal norm he was around, but that act of service was so prevalent at the time because, like you said, I think that was like what they were supposed to do. That's what they were supposed to do. And that's the difference, I think, with him because he was aligned into his authentic purpose because of the little things he was doing. And with that, just the simple thing of acting of service, I don't even think he woke up like one day. He probably didn't even know he was going to be a king. He didn't know he was going to be picked to be a king. And we get put in positions where through our acts of service, through how we approach it, we will one day, even if it's in eternity, we will be gifted back, not just because of you go out and do it just to get gifts back from it, but that's what Christ did himself for us. He gave us a gift from his service to be able to have the eternity of God. So I think that's very prevalent.